Well, hello everyone and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar presented by Service Dynamics. Today's session is going to be on AI in field service, where we'll explore what AI is, how it applies to field service, and what leaders should be doing now to prepare for what's next. With that said, we'll be spending about an hour together, including some time at the end for questions. As Rob mentioned, this session is being recorded and will be available on demand after the live event, so you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. As we move through the presentation, please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A panel, and we'll address as many of those as we can during the Q&A portion at the end. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Robert Jolliffe, president
Let me
of...
take it from here.
You take it from here.
I have a slide. So hi, everybody. My name is Rob Jolliffe. My background is in IT and supply chain. I have over 35 years of experience in ERP and data systems. And a lot of that, I would say more than half of that's being focused on Microsoft technology. One little fact about me is I'm an avid collector of music, but because I'm Gen X, I bought CDs. Because I came in kind of as vinyl was fading away once I had enough money to buy things, and before vinyl came back. So this is my CD collection, and I have been collecting the Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums of all time from their 2003 list, which I actually have this book. Like this red book is a book the size of a vinyl LP. It has essays about different albums, and as you get into the hundreds, like after about 100 they go from essays to more like paragraphs and sentences. But that cabinet has about 490 of those top 500 albums. There's 700 total CDs, but there's a bunch of them that are in there. So let's just get you started, wake people up a little bit. Hopefully you've had some coffee. It goes downhill from here, I'm going to guarantee that. I put this presentation together for a Microsoft user group meeting that was held near me because I have had a lot of difficulty as a business owner trying to understand and wrap my head around what AI is and what I can do with it. And I'm in the technology space. And what I wanted to do was put together not a 40,000 foot view that just talks about AI in general, although there's a little bit of that, and also not a deep dive how to build your first AI, because there's a million of those and they're not very practical to me. And what I wanted to do is a 5,000 foot view on AI. So that's what this is attempting to do. And I would love feedback, by the way, if anybody would like to give us sort of a rating after this on how they felt, maybe out of 10, this addressed some AI questions. So, the goal here is to, like I said, to explain AI, but try and explain it as a business owner or a manager level, not somebody who would necessarily get in and be working with AI and creating it on their own, but maybe responsible for hiring people who would work with AI, or responsible for investing in AI or understanding what they could do with their business. So one of the things I did was I used AI to build some of this presentation, and I asked AI to come up with all of the logos of the top 100 or 150 AI companies. Now I'm going to point a few things out, because this is going to come up. It's going to be a recurring theme. And what you're going to notice is IBM seems to come up a couple times, right? And you'll notice that the Google Cloud, I think, comes up more than once. So why is it putting it in more than one time in this? This is a really good question. We're going to get to that, because this is a case of Copilot hallucinated or did something a little bit like that. And to understand hallucinations, you're going to have to understand what large language models are, which is what this AI trend that we're talking about today is. Because AI itself has been actually around for quite some time. It used to be called expert systems, or sometimes they called it neural networks. But this modern version of AI that came out with ChatGPT a few years ago is all built on this concept of a large language model. And understanding what this AI can and can't do requires us to understand a little bit about a large language model. So in my effort to understand it, I went off and I started listening to podcasts. And I had this podcast that was really did a pretty good explanation for me. And this is sort of what came out of it. So LLMs predict things. They don't answer things. So they're not giving you an absolute 100% this is the right answer. What they're doing is they're giving you a prediction as to what the right answer is. So if I had been chatting with my LLM and I had been talking about how a customer is giving me a testimonial, it would cross-reference that, well, if the customer is giving you a testimonial, they must be happy. But it's really doing that on the basis of attaching. Customers give testimonials when they're happy about things. They don't usually give a testimonial about when they're upset, or at least the testimonial doesn't get published. So understanding that, you have to realize that the LLM isn't really thinking or reasoning things out. Now it's got the ability to understand context, and that's where I had talked about wanting a testimonial, so therefore it suggested happy, because the context matters to it. But is reasoning it out isn't really something it does. So anyway, I didn't like Copilot's artwork, so I asked Gemini to create an infographic explaining how tokens work, and I gave it a hand because it didn't entirely understand it itself. But this is what it created. This is pretty good. A pretty good infographic. By the way, when I go into Gemini and I create infographics, they all look like this. So it's using a sort of template that it's been given. And when I go into Copilot and I do it, they're never anywhere near as nice as this. So how does an LLM work? Simple guide. You input text in the LLM. You start talking to the LLM. The LLM tries to figure out the context, like in my example, testimonial. In this example, write a blog post about. So what are you trying to do? Oh, a blog post. And it has the ability to find out what blog posts are and why people write blog posts. So in that sense, it's got context and understands it. Then what it does is it starts building these tokens. And the tokens are chunks of text. Like in the case of I want to write a blog post, it's got these chunks of text, and it separates what you've typed as a sentence into these chunks of text, and it converts the tokens to numbers. So it's got a big database with all the words and all of the punctuation in English, because I'm in English, and it'll go through it. It has a number for every word and every piece of punctuation, and it feeds it into this crazy model. And the model is like a multi-dimensional matrix of all these numbers. And depending on how close they are to each other, depends on what the probability of something comes out. And this is way too complicated to get into in any detail, although I have a slide that shows details. And then what it'll do is it'll predict the tokens, or it'll use this to understand what you want to do. So what it's trying to do is it's just using this model here, which this is a sort of zoom in on it, to come up with percentage likelihoods that the next word, or in fact the next pixel in an image, is the right pixel or the right word based on what your question was. So the big limit of this is something called a hallucination, which I talked about earlier when I showed the first image. Now I'm going to get into again. And what is an LLM hallucination? Well, it's when a large language model, using its statistical probability methods, gives you an answer that's completely wrong, but sounds super confident and accurate. So the most famous, or one of the famous examples of this, there's another one that I really like, but this is when ChatGPT 5 came out, they prompted it. They said, what's the title of this Adam Tauman-Calley's PhD dissertation? And it answered. It gave 3 answers. They're all completely wrong. And because the reason that it couldn't answer it is because that PhD dissertation was never published and was never documented anywhere on the internet that the LLM could go look it up. And so it made up 3 plausible sounding answers. So LLMs are trained to predict the next word, not verify facts. And one of the problems they're having today with them is that in order to ask an LLM something and have the LLM verify that the answer it's giving you is correct is taking exponentially more energy and computing power and stuff. So it's creating this problem where it's becoming more and more and more expensive to try and program LLMs that can answer facts without making mistakes, without hallucinating. Another hallucination, by the way, somebody asked it who ran across the English Channel in the shortest time, and it gave an answer. So-and-so ran across the English. Well, the English Channel is water, and you have to swim across it, and that was not the right answer. But what it's doing, in particular with this professor's dissertation, is it's looking at everything else the professor's written, and it's trying to guess what it would have been, given what they did write, what would the name of the dissertation have been? And that's what it gave back. Okay, so just another infographic here of this hallucination that it did on the Tauman-Cali dissertation, in case you're interested in it. Well, you'll get a copy of the video, so you can pause here if you really want to look at it. So this is giving us kind of an understanding of what LLMs do, the limitations of LLMs. They can be given instructions, they can follow those instructions, but they may follow them incorrectly. And the more complicated the question that you give the LLM, or the more complicated the task that you assign it, the more likely it will be incorrect. So we get to agents. What are agents? Because a lot of people will talk now about agents. We have an app, we have an agent, we have a chatbot. So the agents are the term that's being applied to the apps that AI are. Technically, ChatGPT is an agent. So if you log in and use ChatGPT or use Gemini or use Copilot, you're interacting with an agent whose job is to chat with you and give you answers to the questions that you're asking it. But agents are going to be, as we go through, as we start using them, you're going to realize that that's a very generic agent that does a very generic thing. There are going to be very specific agents that do very specific things. So with agents, one of the things to keep in mind, because LLMs make more mistakes the more complicated the questions that they have to answer are, the more difficult the tasks they have to do. What we're finding with agent design, people who are designing and building agents, is it's better to build them so they do one task and one task only, because they're more likely to do that well and accurately than if they do many tasks. So when we ask an agent, or we create an agent to do something, it should be small, simple, and kind of concise in what it does. This leads to the creation of agents that use other agents, which is what we're gonna see happening. But I'm going to show you another example of a hallucination, because Microsoft, I'm a Microsoft guy. I got all the Microsoft products. One of them is Copilot. And I'll talk a little bit more about Copilot later and what it really is. But I wanted to create an agent that would auto-record my Teams meetings, because I do a lot of Teams meetings. That's one of the ways we meet with customers. And when I'm doing those Teams meetings, I'm the worst in the company for forgetting to click record. So I wanted an agent that would either remind me, hey, you should record this meeting, or it would actually record the meeting for me. So I went into something called Copilot Studio, which is an agent creation tool. And hey, there's an agent in Copilot Studio that you can tell it what you want it to do, and it'll make your agent for you. It'll vibe code what you want done. So I just told it what I wanted. I said, create an agent that monitors when I start a Teams meeting, prompts me whether I want the meeting recorded, and based on my response, will activate the meeting recording or not. So that's what I typed in, and I said, create the agent, and it did something in the background. It said, hey, your agent's done. I've got your agent. Your meeting recording agent is being created. And this is a screenshot of it after it created it. I thought, this is great. So then I said, how do I install it in Teams? And the meeting recording agent, or actually the regular chat. I went into the regular chat. I said, how do I install this in Teams? And it said, do this and this and that. And I did, and it ended up in my Teams. And in Teams, I had this meeting recording agent. It's beautiful. Wow, that's fantastic. I called Robbie. I said, Robbie, we're going to start a meeting, so my meeting recording agent will start recording it. And I did that, and nothing happened. And so I went to the agent, because it's there, and I said, record my meeting. And it said, okay, I'm recording your meeting, and nothing happened. And the reason is because the agent that I wanted it to create didn't really know what a Teams meeting was. And this is that hallucination thing. This is where it kind of pretended that it had created something that did what I asked it to do, but because it didn't know how to, it didn't stop and say, hey, I don't actually know how to talk to a Teams meeting and do something with a Teams meeting. And I bet you if I did it today, it would be more accurate to probably say, in order for me to do this, you have to do these steps. But at the time, it just made a useless agent that I used as this opportunity to explain. So because it couldn't talk to Teams, it couldn't interact with my Teams meeting. It couldn't get, like, the agent itself couldn't do anything for me. Didn't know I had started a Teams meeting. that led me down the path of, well, how do I make it connect to something like Teams? And I've discovered that there are kind of two ways agents or AIs can talk to applications, where Teams is an application, a field service management solution is an application, and ERP is an application, et cetera. And those two are, I'm going to call it traditional workflow automation with AI. And traditional workflow automation is something that's been around about 15 years, maybe 20 years now. And MCP server with AI, which is really new. So let's talk about these two. And if somebody wanted to get started with AI, they are now going to use an AI to do something. For instance, a really useful thing an AI could do is call ahead for an appointment and say, is somebody going to be there? I'm planning on sending my tech. Is the person going to be available to answer, and let them have access to where the work is to be done? So I'm actually going to sort of talk about that particular example through this. So one, if we go back to getting started with AI, before we get to the agent that's going to phone, it's going to talk to, what can we do internally within our business? Well, first of all, we can start using just regular AI solutions that we can buy off the shelf for our business. And I would recommend Copilot because I'm a Copilot guy. And part of the reason I recommend it is because it's meant for business use, whereas some of the other ones were originally, especially ChatGPT, was originally more released for personal use. They're beginning to find that there is no money in AI for personal use because there's so many free ones. But Copilot is a front end that Microsoft has created specifically to work within their product lines for interaction with AIs, and they don't have their own AI. Microsoft was a heavy investor in OpenAI, so they use GPT to drive Copilot, but they also use Claude, and they may use other AI services in the future, DeepSeek. Like, who knows what they'll be using that they're running on their own servers in isolation from the general branded versions of those products. So they are really focused on data security. And because you're running Copilot and you're in your Office 365, your Copilot can get access to your SharePoint and information that you have, your email and other information you have. The person running the Copilot, what they have access to, the Copilot will have access to. Copilot won't go into, if you're a non-accountant employee using Copilot and you don't have access to any of the accounting information, then Copilot can't get that. But if you are an accounting employee, then you can. And like I said, Microsoft runs its own independent GPT-5, Claude, and other servers, and Copilot uses those servers. So whatever it finds while it's going through, it's not sending it back to those companies, to Anthropic and OpenAI. And finally, or finally for Copilot, there are a bunch of agents that Microsoft's already created that are part of their CRM products or their ERP products, or within just the native Copilot. So you're getting a lot of off-the-shelf stuff that comes from those products. So if getting started with AI, what we're doing internally within our company, and I've spoken to other peer companies that are very similar to us and asked them what they're doing, more or less they're doing the same thing, which is just use what it can do. Don't worry about making some big jump into making AI do like a staff member's job. Like, okay, now I won't have to hire this dispatcher, or I won't have to hire a customer service rep or a sales rep. Don't think of it in that term. Think of it in, I'm going to empower my existing staff. I want them to use these AI technologies to get more done in their job. And when we finish a meeting with a client, all of our notes, because we're recording the meeting, all of our notes get summarized. We can generate follow-up emails out of that, all just using the AI, and save a ton of time and do a better job, frankly. Okay, so the number 2 way to get going with AI is to find somebody who has AI solutions that they've built that are industry specific, that will help you, that are already done. And now we're getting away from the more generic, for anybody in accounting or for anybody in sales or for anybody in particular departments, that the sort of mainline first tier AI solutions come with. But we're getting into stuff that's really specific. So we interviewed a company that's releasing an AI agent that can answer the phone after hours and act as an after hours call center. It's very simple, but it can have a brief conversation with a person. It can understand what their questions or what they're talking about, and it can create a ticket and keep notes and recordings that it can transcribe and add to the ticket, so that when a dispatcher gets that ticket, they can see what the AI and the customer talked about before it came up. This is a great example of the technology, the third party, off the shelf, ready to go AI technology. And part of the reason I think this is really good to work with, and companies should look at these sorts of things, is because that company that created that agent, they're going to charge whatever they charge per month, but they're going to keep it up to date, right? So if you start with these canned AI agents and you look for agents that are built for your industry, like my example of my after hours phone call answering agent, and you interface those agents with your software so that if that agent is able to take the call and create a ticket, your software, you can push the ticket into the software you use today for ticketing. Because AI is not going to, I don't think AI is going to be writing software for everybody so you don't have to buy software off the shelf. I think AI is going to be something that you use to do kind of like regular people tasks. And then the software packages will still be probably off the shelf software tag. There's a bunch of reasons for this, but so you find agents that can interface with your software, and then you use those ready to go agents, and you push that data that they're generating into the software, so that you now have this solution that you're sort of bolting AI onto. Now, you get to the point where, but wait a minute, Rob, you were talking about an agent that would send emails or text or phone customers and ask if somebody's going to be available for an appointment. What about that? Well, that would be building an agent. So building an agent is what I call the level 3. And when you get back to building your agent, we're back to this traditional workflow with automation AI or an MCP server. So let me do the MCP server example. And what I did was I put it together with like a sort of a Visio flowchart just to show what this might look like. So I have Sue. Sue's my dispatcher, and she's going to tell agent 1. And some people, by the way, name their agents. I've seen agents get named like Agent Bob, Agent Sally, Agent Steve. But in this case, I'm just giving them simple names like Agent 1. So Sue says, hey, Agent 1, send appointment SMS texts. So Agent 1 knows how to interact with SMS and can send text messages, and it's being trained to understand to go look into my FSM software, find out what my appointments are for tomorrow or the next, on Monday if it's a Friday, get those scheduled appointments one at a time, and figure out, in this case, do they have an email address or a mobile number? And I think we're following the mobile number path down here. So Agent 1 has to read the FSM software tickets in order to do this. So if the FSM has an MCP server, which is this AI built software tools that are kind of like an API for anybody who understands what an API is, but specifically for AIs to use, then that's agent's going to easily be able to get in there and understand what tickets are and pull the ticket data out. And if I have an SMS messaging, and I know you're not supposed to use SMS anymore, but I can't remember what the new one's called, and everybody knows what that is. So the SMS messaging, if there's an app out there that also has an MCP server for it, then my agent can just interact also with sending and receiving and reading messages. But this agent just sends messages. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. So it goes through all of the tickets. It looks at them and says, hi, our technician, name of technician from ticket, is expecting to be there between hours buffer for appointment time, and is somebody going to be available to let them in? Now, it sent those tickets, and we now need, over the next few hours, as people reply to those SMS messages, we need an agent that listens for those replies. And this agent has been trained to listen to the reply and find out whether the person is saying, yes, I'll be home. It could be, my husband will be home. I'll be home. I'll be back by noon, whatever it happens to be that the person says, and it can identify that as a yes. Yes, they're going to be home. Or a no, they're not going to be home. In which case it says, no, I'm sorry, we're traveling, we won't be able to. And the agent is able to understand that that's a no, and they're going to be able to go back into the ticket and update the ticket and take that appointment off and send Sue a message somehow that, hey, you have to reschedule this. And also you've now got an opening where you can put somebody in for another job. But it's going to get these maybes. And it's going to ask Agent 3 to handle the maybes because it needs to have a conversation now with the person. It can't just take the answer they gave and know that this is a yes or this is a no. So it could be, my kids will be home. And then Agent 3 might send a message back to them and say, are your kids, like, we need somebody who is at least 18 years old to have access to that area because for insurance purposes, whatever happens to be that the conversation would be, would your children be in that age range? Or it could be, my parents are going to be home. Okay, well, are your parents able to gain access? Are they able to walk and give us access to that area? And, do they have any mobility problems? Like, whatever the different questions are that you need to ask as a human, you would have told the Agent 3, these are the sorts of things that need to be done in order for me to answer this. Now, if you don't have an MCP and you're going to build the same exact thing, you're going to do this. This is similar, but what you have here is you have these automation tools that are sitting here. And you have this thing called an API. And you didn't have the APIs and the automation tools. You had the agent talk to the FSM or the agent talk to the SMS. But now it has to go through all these automation tools and APIs. And this is more work to build this agent, and quite a bit more work, actually, because it may be that the FSM or the SMS APIs are not really properly designed for the automation to work with. And so you need to get a programmer in here. Whereas in the previous one, you needed like subject matter experts, maybe a little bit of tech support from people who understood agents and understand a little bit about the MCP servers. But on this automation side, you're probably going to need real programmers who can write real programming code. And I know agents can do that today, but even if an agent writes programming code, you still usually need a human to supervise it. So now I have 3 agents, 2 APIs, 2 automation, and 2 classic software tools. This is harder to implement. So I had a client who wanted to build. Actually, it wasn't a client of mine. Sorry, it was a client of a friend of mine. So he and I are competitors, but friendly competitors. And he was telling the story at a conference where there was a company that wanted to build an estimating chatbot. You communicate with the chatbot, you tell it what you want, it estimates for you, it sends you back an estimate so that you understand, and you can from that point place the order, and the chatbot will go. So if I want like a heat pump put into my basement to keep my basement warm. How big is your basement, and is it insulated, and all of the different questions that would need to be asked before you get that heat pump. And do you have an electrical, and how big's your panel, whatever. And maybe you can ask that question, maybe you can't, depending on that homeowner, but you could ask the right question. In this case, it was a different type of product, and the person who would be placing the order would know the answers to those questions. Without the MCP, it took over 3 months and over $30,000 to build this chatbot agent in a classic software package that didn't have any of that capability. But the product we sell has an MCP agent or an MCP server. The person that was my friendly competitor had built it for under $5,000 in 2 weeks because of this MCP server. So the MCP is really just a technology that's going to become more and more necessary as time goes on, but it's also something that you're going to find most often in cloud software. So cloud technology is going to be easier to create MCP for than any kind of on-prem technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dynamics 365 because that's kind of our sweet spot, and I know it the best, so I can talk a bit more about how MCP works and what it's being used to do. So Dynamics 365 now is almost fully MCP enabled from end to end. So whether that's the CRM product, the field service product, the ERP products, Dynamics 365 Business Central, and finance and supply chain, Microsoft is building out this MCP because Microsoft is building out tons of agents. You're going to find this in other leading product lines. So you're going to find this from especially what I'll call the tier one ERP providers. Oracle with their NetSuite product. You're going to see it in Acumatica. You're going to see it in. I don't know about Service Titan, but I would expect them to be building this in as well because they're pretty well known and pretty big in the market. Microsoft is building out in their sales agents. They're doing finance agents for the accounting department. They're doing these operation and project agents for different project applications. Like right now, they're working on this approvals agent. And some of this stuff is in the really high end version of the Microsoft products. Some of it's in the mid range, smaller end products. Service agents, quality evaluation, case management. You're going to see supply chain agents, forecasting, inventory health agent. So Microsoft's really building a lot of these agents in, and we're going to see this. And because I'm a Microsoft guy, I know it better than my competitors. You're going to see this throughout the industry in the more modern technology platforms. And you're going to start finding that the older technology platforms that don't have the MCP server structure and are generally the on-prem software solutions are not going to be building out this technology and this capability because it's going to be so hard to do. They'll do little bits here and there, but it won't be nearly as much as some of the big players are going to be doing. We sell Microsoft Dynamics Business Central. That's kind of a lower end solution. So it would be for companies with less than probably about 500, 2,000 employees would be the max size. And that would assume maybe 100 people who are computer users. But you're getting like a lot of these features getting added into the Microsoft Business Central product as well. So the vendors are falling over each other trying to connect their products into this AI technology, and this native MCP enabled capability, which is in their FSM module, which they're going to start inheriting any of the products that Microsoft is delivering are going to inherit because they're part of this platform. They're going to inherit this MCP capability. There's a little bit more. I'll keep this on the screen for just a second if anybody's interested in learning what Microsoft is adding. Okay, so one thing I do want to say, I did say that Business Central is sold to companies probably with a maximum of 500, 2,000 employees. Minimum is probably 10 to 20 employees. We have a number of clients who are under 20 employees who are using the product. This is, I think the reason people are looking at these technologies is because they want to make sure that they're ready for AI. They're ready to deploy. They're ready to deploy out into the real world. Okay, so big warning about building your own solutions and your own AI. DIY AI software creation, DIY AI sort of platform building, et cetera. A lot of it has resulted in huge cybersecurity holes in these products. AI does, like, unless you are specifically asking it to do what needs to be done correctly, AI will design really bad software that's really poorly written and that's whether it's you're creating agents and the agentic capabilities or you're trying to just have it vibe code software. So this is a warning I want to provide everybody. The AI can give really bad legal advice. It gives really bad health advice. Like we should be a little bit cautious with it, at least until it's more solid. Okay, so if we're going to come up with different ways we can use AI to improve our businesses, I think there are 4 places where that improvement can really be focused. One is better decision making with existing data. One is reducing risks, and risks can include the risk of like a poor planning on having a customer not present when we go to a site. Risks can also be more serious things like legal risks, but we'll deal more with the risk of lost costs, of exceeding costs, or making errors, etc. You have efficiency and utilization of resources. That's going to be things like trying to find the best time of day path for people to drive between locations, et cetera. And then you have supply chain compliance, which could be making sure that the right products are on the right vehicles, et cetera. So here's a good example. And this, I think, would reduce risk, and it would be supply chain. Check truck inventories. So you could have an agent that looks at tomorrow's work orders before you begin like loading up the trucks or preparing for the day. So it looks at the night before, looks at the inventory on each truck and double checks the work orders for what parts are probably required. And it can look at this piece of equipment. I've seen 100 examples of it. This is the typical item that we use when we're repairing it. Is it on the truck? Or it comes up 50% of the time we need this and 10% of the time we need that, et cetera, et cetera. You could tell the agent, if it's a more than 20% likelihood or more than 10% likelihood that this item would be used during a repair, make sure it's on the truck for any services being done to that equipment. You can even go and look into the vendor's repair manuals if those are available. So you pick the inventory and you create a requisition so that somebody, it doesn't pick the inventory, creates a requisition so that somebody makes sure that that truck gets these extra items added to it. And then it's going to decrease the risk of a return trip. It increases your human efficiency. Your person is going to get that repair may be done during the first visit, so you don't have to send them back for a second visit to get that repair. It should be much more profitable if you're able to do that. So you have to think about, like, I would create a procedure as if you were showing a junior employee how to do this. And in this procedure, you would write out essentially the steps required to make sure that the right stuff's on the truck. This is how AIs work. They are, again, I think I've described this before, but think of them as like a co-op student or a junior employee, and you're giving them instructions to do a task. And you try and keep that task simple. And you might have multiple AIs. You might have one AI that checks what are the right parts to be used, another AI that checks the inventory and receives the parts from the first AI and checks the second, et cetera. But the ultimate goal would be, you got an agent that connects to your FSM and it pulls out your work orders. It looks at history. It checks tomorrow's technician work orders, and then it creates a material pick for those components to go on the truck. If the FSM has inventory control and material pick capability, all the better, because then it's going to be super easy to do this. If it doesn't, then that's probably going to require a whole bunch of extra work or connecting to Excel sheets or whatever. Okay, another concept is optimized travel times. So your humans can pick appointments on a screen, but you can click a button like AI optimize, and it can check Google Maps time of day travel times. So, at this time of day, that traffic is really heavy here, trying to avoid going through there at that time of day. I think we can always do shortest path. There's lots of things that'll do that today, but I'm not sure that checking the time of the journey is available in all FSMs. Well, you can now return an optimum sequence of addresses based on the time of day. So avoid rush hour in this particular area of the city. The human would approve the sequencing before setting those appointment times. I actually played with this in GPT. I took some of our staff home addresses, and I said, if I have to travel between these 5 home addresses, what would be the most optimal time to do it? The more addresses I did, because I also did I have 2 techs and they can go to these 8 addresses. What's the most optimal time if each of them needs to visit 4? It took a long time to do that calculation. I also think you probably would need a paid Google Maps API account. I believe that there are these different account types that you can get with Google and Bing and different places that do this type of mapping, and just upgrade that, because I suspect part of the reason it was slow was the AI itself trying to connect into Google Maps was taking time because it had to do a lot of checks, but also because I think the maps detected the same IP address over and over and over, requesting the same things, and it slowed down. Okay, another concept which is do a permit and an inspection agent that would watch for job milestones and then automatically build inspection request packages based on things like your communication, your items that are used, the description of the job or the project that you're working on, and it can draft an outbound email or portal checklist. So it can go in and grab drawings. It can, um, pull all of that information, and it's found inside your system that's connected with that job. Now, by the way, I asked Copilot, what else could I do? Can you give me some ideas? And it came up with that and a bunch of other ideas, such as checking on delivery dates with suppliers. So having an agent send emails to suppliers for anything that's a little bit longer lead time, just to validate, or even have it do it instead of the purchasing agent. So if you've got a bunch of orders coming in, a bunch of requests, and the AI is able to go look at what are they going to need for this job, send out emails to suppliers and say, hey, I have a bunch of jobs coming up. Do you have these in stock? Transcribing technician notes via AI voice to text. I think that's happening. I think people are doing that, but that's an obvious one. As built job documentation agent was really interesting. I think that's a really good use case for it, and a job duration estimation agent where it would look back at previous jobs that are really similar and look for patterns and try and learn how long would a job like this take. Now, for those of us who do that kind of estimation, I do it in-house for my IT business here. It's a scary thought because do they need us anymore? But yeah, because there's always going to be that really weird situation that the AI isn't going to be able to understand that this is a Sentry home that has, double brick and it's a completely different installation process. There's not enough of them to learn that, but that allows you to spend more time probably working on getting the estimates more accurate and losing less business for too high an estimate and winning business that you lose money on because you underestimated it because you're in a rush. So I think there's value to that, even though some of us might be scared. So that concludes my discussion about AI in field service for service dynamics, and I am opening the floor to questions.
Okay, so I've just allowed the microphone for all attendees. So if any of you want to, unmute yourself and ask Rob some questions directly, we highly encourage that. Until one of you do, though, I do have some questions for you, Rob.
Sure.
So why do your agents need to be treated like junior employees? And why do you need only one agent to do something?
Well, you need an agent to do a task, and the tasks need to be really simple. And I did sort of explain this, but when they first tried to create agents to do multi-step tasks, the AI got confused. And so because it had essentially to keep in its memory, if you will, what it had done in the previous task, and then it had a lot of different, if this happens, do that, if that happens, do this kind of instructions, the agent started to get confused and it started to do things incorrectly. So what they did was they broke that into multiple separate, simpler tasks. So you had a work instruction, like you're going to have a co-op student or a junior employee join the company. You create this big, long work instruction on how to load the truck with parts, but there's lots of bits and pieces in it. And if they're not following it correctly, they make mistakes. And that would happen to a human too. Humans might be smart enough to say, this looks wrong. AIs aren't. And so the AIs were just making a lot of mistakes. They were hallucinating. They were doing a lot of stuff wrong. What they found was if they broke it down and they made 4 agents that each did a task and one supervising agent, or each agent called the other agent as they needed something done, they worked together as a little team, so to speak. That worked really well, and it was faster too. Each agent completed its task faster, because the more complicated, and this I got into this a little bit on the, more energy, more computational power to to give correct answers. The more complicated the task it has to do, the more checks and balances you need in there to make sure that it's not making mistakes, the longer and slower and more energy it takes for the AI to complete. So it also had the benefit of reducing costs because you're paying for AI when it's generating tokens. I took those slides out because it was getting a little bit too long, but there's a whole like science slash like magic science art to minimizing how much you're spending on AI because the AIs use the token capabilities to run their queries and do things, and you're charged for that.
Right. So another question that came in is, can I just vibe code and make my own AIs?
Well, and I got to that a little bit too, which is you can, and you could build these AI agents that way. But the problem you're probably going to run into is unless you have one of these newer technology platforms that are cloud-based, you also have to figure out how to interact with your on-prem solution or old technology platform. And some of them are locked down and there isn't much of a way. And so you could get hallucinations like I got with my Teams integration where the AI didn't know how to do it. So I asked it to do this thing and it couldn't because it couldn't do it. You could end up with situations where you're trying to vibe code something. And as I mentioned earlier, you end up creating something that's really, really cyber insecure, et cetera. So vibe coding, for those who don't know, just in case, vibe coding is talking to the AI and telling it what you want it to program, and the AI actually doing that computer programming for you as if it's a computer programmer you've hired, and you're just telling it what you want it to do, and then it's generating the code. If you're pretty user friendly, like if you're pretty good with like logic and math and science, and you're one of those types of people who likes that sort of thing, you can learn enough of the code that it's writing that you could correct it and tell it what it did wrong. But if you don't have a computer science education, then you may end up having the AI write something that works and it looks good, and to your uneducated eye, it's fine, but actually it blows up and it does something really bad that you don't want. So that's kind of what the risk is of vibe coding. I have heard, and a lot of IT businesses, a lot of software businesses have lost a lot of value in the stock market lately because Claude in particular, which is Anthropic's AI, has started doing some really great computer programming and coding. And there's this idea that, well, nobody will ever buy computer software anymore. They'll just get an AI to program the computer software they want. This is serious. Like, this is actually a big thing. And I've seen people reproduce Spotify, right? They create something that'll play their music collection for them. The trouble is that that would probably be illegal because you'd have to get you'd have to pay the music companies for license. It's kind of the Napster thing all over again, and you'd have to be a little bit older maybe to know what Napster is, but that was a music piracy thing that was really popular for a long time. But the other thing is, I think for many, many products, there's a bit of a what do they call it again? It's kind of a group effect, right? Like it's a community effect. You need to have, like, if you're going to recreate LinkedIn for yourself, well, nobody else joins your homemade LinkedIn. It's useless because the whole value of LinkedIn is that it's connected to a whole bunch of people. I think there's more of that in software than people realize. Like if you have an FSM software package, there's a certain amount of, once you get to a certain size, like your bank being able to connect into the accounting software so that you can do bank reconciliations quickly. Different sort of gap accounting requirements that need to be followed, and people used to working with QuickBooks, and so you decide to vibe code your own accounting software package. But now people who know QuickBooks come in and go, I don't like this because I like QuickBooks. So what do? You tell it to recreate QuickBooks? Somebody's going to get sued. It's going to be a lot of lawsuits thrown around if that's kind of what happens.
Right. I guess too, like with what you said about the hallucinations, that becomes a very a very scary thought with code, for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a little bit.
Priscilla, I see that you're unmuted. Just wanted to know if you had any other questions. Nope, nothing.
You're
That's
unmuted, but we
okay.
don't hear you. So if you are trying
Yeah.
to ask a question, Priscilla, you might want to type it into the Q&A. It looks like you're trying to talk. I can see the little highlight, but we can't hear you.
Oh, I see typing going on.
None
None
so
so
far.
far. Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and I'd also like to thank Rob for giving an amazing presentation. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar. I hope you found it insightful, and I hope that you all have a great day.
And if there's any feedback, please be free to email or leave it in the chat. Thank you so much.